So what we're going to look at today is we're going to unpack those research standards, really looking at the key aspects, but also some things that are going to work well. We'll have a look at some resources that are going to help you, and we're going to have some questions and answers at the end of those questions that have been submitted. Okay, so karakia to start. Whakataka ki te muri, whakataka ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. He ake ana, ti atakura, hi tiu, hi huka, hi hauhunga, ti hei moderator. Okay, so we'll start with the level 2 research. The emphasis of this one is on the research process. So there's a series of steps, and the focus is on primary data collected from the field. So learners have to have collected the data themselves. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later. In the explanatory notes and also the conditions of assessment, it refers to guidance. So this should really be provided with the topic selection, the identification of any aim or aims, and appropriate fieldwork procedures. So this is going to ensure that students use a topic that has a spatial component and also allows for enough primary data to be collected. Now, students do need to provide evidence for all of that, so for each component of the geographic research process with the final report, but some of that can be attached. So I know some of the ones we get in will be attached with like the raw data tables in an appendix. So however you do that, it needs to be submitted. The aim in the data collected must allow for the data to be collected in presented in a combination of ways, and also allow for findings to be fully explained. And we'll talk more about that in a moment as well. So let's talk about the data. You're going to need a range of primary data. So this is not multiple types of the same data. So for example, lots of photos or lots of interviews or lots of transects, but a combination of appropriate data types for the aim and the explanation. So it could be photos and interviews and transects. Remember that it's research with guidance. So at level 2, the teacher can guide this part. Consider how much data is needed. So you're not going to need 50 interviews, but you've got to consider that the aim in the data must allow for that combination of presentation and also allow for the findings to be fully explained. Right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the presentation. So we've got the different grades here, and the grade is really determined by both the accuracy and the effectiveness of the presentation. So for the presentation to be considered effective, it could be grouped or integrated. So some of the ones we see will have statistical maps combining both spatial and statistical data. So this can look like a few different things. For example, you could have a map, and then you could have graphs around the map pointing to certain locations where the data was collected. So that's just one example. Some sort of mapping should be in there, so it is required. But when you're doing the mapping, it can't just be a screenshot of a map. You actually have to plot something on the map. And the accuracy relates to the appropriate conventions for maps and for graphs. Okay, so let's have a look at the research findings. When explaining those, students should demonstrate understanding of their evidence. So understanding of the data they have collected. And when it says explain, we're really wanting the why. So making its significance to the overall research clear. You also have to incorporate relevant geographic concepts and also supporting evidence from the collected or presented data. Now, this is going to work best when it's integrated with the data presentation. So I'll give you an example of that, where you have a bar graph and then an explanation of the findings from that bar graph. And then you could have a cross section that has photos and then an explanation of those findings. Okay? So that's the integration of the presentation and the research findings together. Conclusion and evaluation. So the conclusion is not new discussion. It's a summary and it relates back to the research aim. The evaluation there needs to focus on the research process, so showing clear links between the strengths and the weaknesses and the validity of the findings and all the conclusions that are there. Just take note that to reach excellence, the evaluation has been extended. So you've got to look at methods of improving the research process. So this could be through an explanation of different data collection methods that could improve the overall validity of results. So for level 2 research, what works well? We have had quite a wide variety of topics this year that have worked well. These have an aim that is clear and allows for multiple types of primary data to be collected. So remember, that's when I said photos and transects and interviews. They're just some examples. There's other types of primary data that could be there. The successful ones also have primary data that allows for different types of presentation methods, and also at level 2, a full explanation. Topics that work well are really ones that work for your location and for your learners. So it's going to be a little bit different across the motu about what works for us all. But later I'll talk about some resources where you can see some examples where that does happen. Okay, let's have a look at level 3 research. So like the level 2, the emphasis of this is on the research process, so the series of steps, and also focus on primary data collected from the field. Now, it can be supplemented with secondary data, but the focus remains on primary data. Level 3 is different from level 2 in the way that is research with consultation. So here students manage the research process. The teacher can provide a framework for the selection of the topic. So that could be around a location or a theme. Okay. Let's have a look at some of the aspects of the level 3 research standard. So you'll see here that mapping is mandatory. So you must have it. An accurate application of those geographic conventions is expected at the level 3. As said previously, something must be plotted on the map. So not just a screenshot of a location, but some data or something that is indicated on the map. And this could be hand-drawn, or it could be computer generated, and that's fine. Effective presentation will be determined by the nature of the research. Usually it involves the integration or the combining of the data in some way. So this could be a map, say with graphs or photographs around it. Note there, for excellence, there's a critical analysis of findings that is required. And this is a closer examination or look of the findings. So what does this include? It could be factors or circumstances that may have influenced the findings. Could be any irregularities in the findings, or it could be sometimes any relationships that appear. As with level 2, the presentation will work best when the presentation and the analysis are integrated together. When we're looking at level 2 and 3 together, remember that it's an achievement standard. So you must do all of the achievement criteria for achieved, likewise with merit, etc. So you can't holistically say, well, this learner here has an understanding at a merit level, so therefore I've given them a merit. They must do all of that merit criteria. So just focusing on level 3 for a moment, what works really well? Well, like level 2, it's going to work best when there's an aim that allows for different types of data to be collected and presented and allows for the analysis of findings. And once again, I think the stronger ones we get through is where a topic has really resonated with the learners. And so that can be based on your location or things that are of interest to them. So that's quite a lot of information all in one go. Let's have a look at some resources that can help you. So what we've got here is a screenshot of the NCEA website. And I'm just going to point out a few things that are here, but of course you may wish to have a look in your own time at some of these aspects. So first up, you can see the standards, and this is the link to the achievement criteria, but also the explanatory notes. So for research, there's some important things there, particularly around, the consultation and the guidance level required. The teaching and learning guide, that's really helpful when planning units of work. The clarifications, this link will give you further detail to each standard. The exemplars of student work, this has annotated exemplars. It's only extracts, but it can be very useful to know what some of those grade boundaries are. And it's also got some examples of different contexts that some of the schools are using. There's also the National Moderators Report, and that provides feedback just regarding general issues and trends that have been identified. And obviously that's just with the internally assessed standards. One that I really want to highlight that is on the NCEA page is further support that's there for you. And what is really useful about this is it's completely free. You use it in your time. You can use it multiple times. So we've got different courses here for geography to help you. You'll see I've put an arrow which shows that there's a specific research one there, in fact, a couple of ones there, but there's a range of other geography courses that are helpful. All you need for that is your education login, which your principal's nominee can help you with if you're not sure about that. The other thing I will say is the assessor support here in Pūtake is actually available for lots of different subjects, even though we're only talking geography today. So you might want to point that out to some of your friends and colleagues, because there's a lot of really great stuff there that you can use. Right, that was quite a lot of information on a Wednesday afternoon midweek. So what we're going to do now, Cassandra's just going to set up a quick activity where we've got 5 questions and it's linked to the research standards. So I'm just going to get, when it pops up, going to get you to answer them as best you can and then press submit at the end. The important thing to know when you submit is that your answers are not going to be displayed individually. So we'll just get a combination of all of the answers there. So I'll just get you have a go now and see what you think.
Brilliant. So I will just share the poll now. So I've launched the poll. It should appear on your screen. If it doesn't, we will talk to it in a few minutes. It does sometimes depend upon how you've entered it. But if you can scroll down through that wee pop-up window and select the relevant answers that you would like, and like Amy said at the end, hit the submit button, and we'll give you guys sort of about a minute or so to go through that. and then share the results, which are anonymized.
Hopefully the questions aren't too challenging for a Wednesday afternoon. You might want to make sure you read all the questions. There are a couple of ones in there where you might want to read the one at the bottom. Wonderful, wonderful to see all those answers going in. Right, and just while we're waiting on people to finalise their decisions, after we go through these answers, we'll talk a little bit about feedback that you can give me, and we will also go through the questions that many of you have submitted, and there's some really great questions in there. So thank you to those that did submit. If after hearing all of that, you have further questions, that's okay. Your kairahi can help you there, and you can email them. Right, we'll just give it.
Yeah, maybe another 10 seconds or so for any final responses, and then we'll end the poll.
Excellent. Last ones now.
Lovely. So I'll just end the poll now and share the results, and it should appear on your screen, and Amy will talk to those.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cassandra. So question one, which of these is not a geographic, oh, didn't quite word that so well. What of these isn't considered geographic conventions for maps? And here we've got different geographic conventions. Technically, it is the map reference or author. However, what you tend to find, particularly as a lot of our learners now use Google Maps or ArcGIS or other ones, the reference is there anyway. So that's an interesting note there. Orientation is a north point, although of course latitude and longitude counts in there as well. Don't always need a key in there, depending on, of course, what is being mapped. The next question, which of these is primary data? And I put a range of some types. These aren't all the types. And the answer is all of the above, as long as the learners have collected it themselves. Okay. So any measuring things, counting things, surveys, interviews, photographs, observations, all of those actually count. When should I use primary data? For the geographic research, the answer is always. So you've always got to have primary data for both, in fact, for the level 1 as well. So for all the research standards, you must have it. And 100% for the graphs, so that's fantastic. Graphs can be presented hand-drawn or using some sort of program or function on computers, or even a combination of that. It doesn't matter as long as those graphing conventions are followed. And what presentation types of data can be used? And we had a few different types there, but the one at the end is all of the above, and probably some that I haven't even mentioned on there as well. Now, some of those, if we have a look, can actually be combined together. So, for example, some of us might be familiar with a climate graph where you'll have a bar graph and a line graph together. When I talked about the presentation and I talked about integrating some sort of data, some of that could be on a map. So you could have a map with percentage bar graphs around it. So well done, everyone. That was pretty great for a Wednesday afternoon. And now my computer doesn't want to move. So let's just see if it will. Fantastic. What I've got here is the feedback, a link to the feedback about this. So I'm going to leave that up while I go through some of the questions that we've received today. And might be a good idea now just to take note of that link. And even while I'm talking, you can think about some of the things that I've talked about today and give some feedback. The feedback is super important, particularly because in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be talking through the global standards. And so I need to know what has worked well and what you wish there would be in these presentations. So please take the time to do that. I will take the time to read through. So thank you in advance for that. Okay, let's have a look at some of the questions we've got. And as I say, a huge thank you to those who submitted these. First question, what is the difference in the amount of data required between level 2 and level 3 research? Great question. There's not going to be an exact answer, but there is a way to tell. Look at the research aim and think about what data could be collected to address the requirements of the standard and that aim. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. So if you're looking at, say, coastal research on spatial variation. So this is a similar one some might do at level 3. What data is going to address that? You also need to think, particularly with coastal, about what's going to be safe to collect. And so, of course, your health and safety policies are really important there. You're going to need some aeolian data, some hydrological data, and depending on your coastal environment, potentially vegetation data. It's better to have more types than less. But remember, it's not about volume of one type, it's about having the coverage of different types. Okay? So think about what's going to address the aim and allow for the explanation at level 2 or the analysis at level 3 and allow for different presentation types. It must also have an open aim, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Let me give you a similar example where it's not going to work. So staying on the kind of coastal research idea, if you had an aim that says, does longshore drift happen at this location? The data that you collect would probably be longshore drifts, so say the orange kind is a traditional one that people use, maybe some wind data. You're not going to have enough there to analyse or present, so it's not going to work. So going back to the question, how can you kind of tell? I would have a look in Putaki, so those NCEA resources that I talked about, because there's a research planning module, and that can be really useful. We've also got the Kairahi who are funded to help, so they can help you with some of those. Next question. I've just started at a school that allows their students to do the geography assessments over periods of weeks rather than 3 to 4 periods as stated in the assessment guidelines. Is this problematic for authenticity? So I think this is getting about how the assessment's done in and out of class time over a period of time. To read up on that, NCEA's got a really good link. So if you just Google NCEA authenticity, you'll find a really nice summary of everything there. And that's kind of easier than trying to take it all in right now on a Wednesday afternoon. What I found as a teacher, though, that for geographic research, it's not really an issue because they're using primary data they've collected themselves. So they can't really copy anything online. But have a look at that NCEA site on authenticity. There's also your principals nominee and your subject associations as well. So this was one on level 2 and level 3 research. How can we help students in level 3? Oh, sorry, just level 3. How can we help students at level 3 if they have not done geography before? So we might go beyond consultation and how much scaffolding is too much. We do get new students at level 3. The key is the teaching and learning program beforehand. So the assessment at level 3 is consultation for research, but the teaching and learning program happens prior to the assessment, and that can incorporate the learning and the research process. So that is my advice there. Question, how can you collect a range of data if it's only based on a questionnaire? Well, a questionnaire is not a range of data. A questionnaire is one type of data, like photos or interviews or cross-sections are types of data. You need more for geographic research at all of the levels. So photographs, counting things, measuring things. This must be considered in the initial planning. And just remember the conditions of assessment with the amount of guidance that you can give them. Question, what is the difference between a closed and an open aim? So a closed aim is one that is predefined by a limited range of options. So like a yes or a no. So a basic example, are there enough seats in a park? You can really only answer yes or no. An open aim is where the matter is not decided. So for an example, an investigation into amenities at a park. In this aim, the outcomes are not known. In geographic research, you need to have open aims, and this allows for a range of data and a range of presentation. Consider the requirements at the curriculum level though, and for that, you might want to look at the annotated exemplars on the NCEA site, and also those Pūtaki courses that I talked about earlier. So range of multiple data types are key. Question, does the data collected have to explain the research aim, or can this occur from secondary data? So geographic research is focused on primary data. So students have to have collected it themselves. The aim in the collection of data should be based on this, and the teacher should be checking that aspect as per conditions of assessment. The next question, how do you cope with a student who is unable to attend a field trip? Well, in the geographic research, students must be involved in the data collection. Okay, so students do not have to collect all the data themselves. So for example, on a field trip, you might have groups of students in different areas collecting the data, and then that would be collated after. Or you may have students in groups responsible for different aspects of the data collection. So for example, someone could be doing a quadrat, another doing photos, and another doing species identification. So the student must be involved in collecting the data. One solution is for the student being away, is there an opportunity for them to collect some data in another time period, or perhaps in another location? Do consider safety for that, and obviously your school will have policies and things on that. Last question we have been given today. How much guidance can you provide in a field booklet? So I'm going to answer this differently for level 2 and level 3. So for level 3, the explanatory notes and the conditions of assessment clearly indicate that consultation will result in students managing the research process. So the teacher can provide the framework for the location, which is often what we do on a trip, or a theme. It may help to ensure students select a topic that has that spatial component, and once again allows for different data types to be collected. So you don't provide a field booklet as such, but students can make their own. You can provide, and I've done this before, an information booklet. So for example, going back to the coastal research idea, you might have an information booklet with species types, Beaufort scale, some different diagrams of some of the processes that are occurring. Okay? And that can be helpful for students on the trip. Level 2 is a little bit different. So the explanatory notes and the conditions of assessment there indicate that guidance should be provided. So you should be helping them to identify the aim or aims, appropriate field work, ensuring there's enough data, those sorts of things. So the level of help you give at level 2 and level 3 is different. Also consider that the assessment is not the whole teaching and learning program. There's a whole lot of work that would happen beforehand. And of course, in many of your courses, they build year upon year as well. But do have a look at those subject resources on the NZQA page, because I think it's really helpful to see what's out there. And also, I'll give a plug for the New Zealand Board of Geography teachers and the regional geography associations, because they've got some really great resources that are unique to your areas too. So do have a look at that. So I've left that feedback form up there. So thank you very much for filling that out. That's going to be super useful in the global presentation that's coming up soon, which is Monday, the 19th of June. So do take a note of that because we will be going through those as well. And you can see there, gosh, I do love my geographic pictures. Karakia to finish. So whakataka tiho ki te muri, whakataka tiho ki te tonga. Kia mā kena kena ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai. He ake ana ti atakura, he tiu, he huka, he ho hunga, ti hei, mauri ora.